have anyone on Zoom?
Just one person, Stacy Duck.
Good. All right. Good evening. This is Brook Township Board of Supervisors workshop meeting for Wednesday, March 1st, 2023. Start off with we'll call up order now for announcements. Do we have any announcements?
We do not, John.
All right. So at this point, we'll go to an open forum. So I'm going to ask on this side of the room if anyone has any questions. And let me just check. We're set up. Are we set up for two open forums, one for today's agenda and one for a follow-up?
Yes.
Okay. So this will be an open forum for the items that are on the agenda. Do I hear any questions on this side of the room? I don't see any. So on this side of the room. All right. We'll proceed to our next item. Do we have anybody on Zoom that has any questions? Hearing none, we'll go ahead. Okay, we'll start with our business. Review of the March 8th regular meeting agenda.
Sure, so all the supervisors, in fact, you all have a copy. Yes. You are a copy. We have our standard consent agenda, which are all our reports, meeting minutes. We are still getting some reports coming in last minute, so they'll be added this week. For new business, it's light. These are traditional approving the bills of the treasurer. Act 537 plan revision for 450 Beaver Dam Road. The annual agreement for the Twin Valley Baseball Association, which was previously called Twin Valley Little League, entered into a yearly agreement where they get use of James Arnold Park during the season. There are 5 releases. Mike is not in attendance tonight because they are pretty standard. If there's any questions, I think that's why anybody needs information prior to the next meeting, but they're standard releases. 2 for Chestnut Ridge, 1 for the Chester County Solid Waste Authority Recycling Center. One for Village Green Phase 1 and 1 for Village Green Phase 2. And then just going over old business, which would be the EAC, and that's it for next week's agenda. If there's any specific questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Don't have any questions on that agenda. Okay. Nothing on the items here. Let's see. Looking at the next item, we have the land preservation and maintenance fund.
Yes, so when we started building out our 5-year strategic budget with Paul Hansen, we took the approach, Paul and I, that we should be properly funding our individual funds such as recreation, which ultimately in the next handful of years should be actually paying for the services rendering for recreation. So I did have Beth Cole come this evening, so she's going to give you a little review. We are permitted under state law to take some of the funds that are traditionally for open space and utilize them for maintenance, which would go for recreation. But I'll turn it over to Beth to kind of give you a review.
Yeah, so just, as a broad overview, the Pennsylvania's open space law, which is the authority under which the township has enacted the EIT tax for open space preservation. It provides that, all the things that these funds can be used for. They can be used for recreation, park maintenance type activities. In terms of how that works, there's a provision in the law that sets forth that in any given year, 25% of the amount of that body of tax dollars that are sitting in your fund today can be used for any purpose of that park. The exact language for you, but it's
There's woodlands and then there's
well, it's not the Woodlands specifically, so it's for any type of development, improvement, design, engineering, or maintenance of property that the township had acquired for those open space and recreation purposes. So that would be kind of a, you know, if in 2023 you wanted to spend, I don't have the exact numbers, but up to a quarter of what is in that fund, you have the authority to do that. The other thing, but you would have to spend it. You can't just set it aside. The other thing you can do is funnel money into a maintenance fund. And what that looks like is every year you can take up to 25% of the funds received that year. Not, you know, the whole pile of money, but and actually put that in a separate fund for maintenance purposes. So that would be more of kind of an ongoing way to set funds aside. Is that 25% of each year's revenue can go into a long-term maintenance fund, and then you can use that at will as needed for the park purposes. Yes, I mean, you know, that is the letter of the law. I'm not sure what specific questions.
So just want to ensure that, you know, we have balanced our budget over the next 5 years with the understanding that we're potentially going to get new parks, potentially going to have to upgrade our current park, and that as it stands, in previous years, we have just taken money out of our general funds for land preservation and fund it as needed. I think the better way to govern is to actually have a healthy recreation fund. So as we start looking, which we're going to talk about next for capital improvement plan, as we're looking at doing these larger projects over the next 5, 10, 15, 30 years, you should be able to look at your fund balance and say, is it healthy enough to take on these projects that we want to do it on? So as it's currently built out, I just need some direction whether the board is interested in starting a maintenance fund, and we don't have to go directly to that 25%. I will note that our fund had close to about $4 million in the beginning of this year. We've invested some of that in our plated funds, our Pennsylvania Local Investment Government Trust. It's earning about 5%. So even just on that fund interest, we're going to be earning a few $100,000. So even if we elect just to take maybe for the next handful of years, start ramping it up 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%, and see where our fund balances start landing, then we can start looking at what we want to make our recreation program here. Obviously, our land preservation fund, when it was started many, many years ago, had sole purpose on the TDRs, the transfer, purchasing the development rights. Right, so that was the goal of this program when it was started. Now, 15 years later, maybe, you know, we have the ability to maybe alter our vision of what we think we can use some of those funds for. Is it for potentially recreation funds? Putting it aside in case we want to purchase open space to make a park and not buy TDs in the future. This, I think, is just a healthy and fiscally responsible way to start planning the government finances and how you work over the next handful of years.
Does it have to be, do we have to set a certain percentage and stick with that number, or can it change? Like if we elect to take a percentage of 1 year's, does that have to remain, can we?
It doesn't. It really is, as I understand and guidance I've seen about this law, it really is just from an allocation standpoint. It's kind of saying you can deliberately take a budget and move money, because the first piece basically says this tax is sitting in its own kind of separately earmarked bucket. And so you can either, in a given year, you can write a check out of it directly to a project. But otherwise, you know, to transfer that money somewhere else, it's kind of saying it allows you to move money to a maintenance fund, and it authorizes that kind of allocation. It really is a budget-focused exercise, that you're planning to use it in that way. And you can accrue money over time and with that vision. There also is, that being said, the law does say that even if you do that, it doesn't preclude you from then using it for acquisition of land. acquiring land rights, which is where we started, and then there's the design, maintenance, kind of implementation we're talking about here. Just because you put it in that maintenance fund doesn't mean that if an opportunity would arise, that, we said, wait, we need that $300,000 that we've accumulated in the maintenance fund. There's a property that really makes sense and there's not enough sort of sitting in the other acquisition bucket. You can allocate it back.
Well, one of the concerns that I have is that I remember when the earned income tax was approved by the residents, and it was a referendum. So at the time, and I understand that there's been an expansion of the definition to include the parks and recreation subsequent to when we voted on it. But the initial presentation and what we continued to say over the years was that the land preservation money was for farmland protection, and it was never intended for the parks. And then within the last few years, money was taken out of that account. At one point, there was a resolution that we had that said there was a 20-year window for this program. So we're in year 17. My concern is that the taxpayers are expecting to pay for something, and now it's a good idea to fund the parks, but I think this is something that should go to the voters and get their input on. Do you want to continue to tax the EIT at 0.5 to include, the maintenance of the parks? Because I think that's, best use. The people who are paying it, I think they, should have a say in the matter. Also, we did discuss a few years ago, this board, that we would have an opportunity to reduce that earned income tax, bring it down to 0.25. We were fortunate over the years that our share was no longer at 50%. At some points, we were getting a share of 75%. So it allowed us to acquire additional land, and our amount of contribution was at 25%.
With the county,
What's that?
you mean with the county?
We had a matching fund, so we had, in addition to the county participation, the agreement was 50-50. We were receiving money from Rand Wine Conservancy, other organizations. We even received money from the
To
city.
help with your 50%.
Yeah,
So
correct.
you're
And
not-
that reduced our, so that, it was a great opportunity for us to reduce the tax burden on the residents. But my conversations over the years with residents, there was an expectation that this would, at some point, this dedicated earned income tax would no longer be charged, because you have a limited amount of farmland to put into conservation easements. And at some point, you continue to collect taxes when that purpose is no longer needed. So my concern there is if we want to go with a referendum, I think that would be appropriate. The second thing is, or we could just do a survey in the community and find out, to get their feedback on that. Because it's one thing, I'm really concerned about this park on Cupola Road. We have the deed to that land, but it's been, 25, 30 years? We haven't done anything with it. Now we've got a trail going through behind the property, and we've got a potential, a park alongside, their properties. This is a major change, for that community.
I don't think we should get into that
Yeah.
specific park. I mean, I think the vision is more parks in general for the township.
Understood.
In terms of if we are going to have parks, whether funds get used. And I appreciate your position. What I'm going to tell you is I've looked at the language of the referendum, the law, and the law that was in place at the time,
Yes.
and what's in our tax ordinance. And I think that legally, we can use those funds for that purpose. I'm not saying it doesn't,
Yes.
look at your fellow supervisors, not me, as to whether you
Well,
want to
we
check
did
this
discuss this
out.
over the years, because
Okay.
when we went through the
And I know
presentation.
it's come up in the
Yeah,
past.
we had a presentation in 2005 by Brandon Wine Conservancy, and a lot of people were not too happy with it. I stated in my position that, during the open forum, that we were given a good proposal, but what we needed was a plan to understand what we were paying for. And when the ordinance was written, most of us were saying, what does that mean? It was pretty much left wide open. Then I served on the Land Preservation Committee. I had a copy of the resolution, but it was the draft. And then when we finally got a copy of what was finally passed by the Board of Supervisors, then this was a few years later, the 20 years was taken out. So that's one of the things that the initial intent was for that farmland protection, to build a barrier for future development and to protect the farms. And that's what we approved. So, I mean, I can speak for myself, my board members can speak for themselves as well. And I think the input that we're getting lately is the use of the taxes. And I think we need to get input on that. Your take on that?
No, I just have a comment on that.
Yes.
So we're talking about using potentially a percentage of the land preservation funds. So based on the attendance this year, are there going to be any new properties built into that program? And I mean, I looked at the spreadsheet, but you know, is there somebody that could tell me how many, like, what is the life of those the land already in the program? I mean, are there going to be potentially any new ones going in this year? I mean, you know, to see if the funds are in there, what the balance of that fund looks like, should we elect to use some of those funds? You know what I mean, just to see.
It's a fair question. I mean, I'll chime in. You know, as enacted, this tax goes on indefinitely.
Yeah.
That is what was approved and is adopted by ordinance.
Yes.
And the law is very clear that to stop the collection of that designated tax, you have to do that by referendum. So, but that being said, there's already a pot of money. And
Yeah.
so, you know, I think kind of your question, Laura, is what is the potential that we will even use maybe what's in the bank today for land preservation in any type of near future, let alone should we continue accruing it? You know, I think they're all valid questions. And, you know, I don't know what the climate looks like. I mean, you can't, you know, you can condemn someone's property under the Open Space, you know, Act, but I don't think the township's looking to take, you know, a farmer up the road and say, you gotta stop farming, we're taking your property. I mean, we're looking for voluntary landowners from a conservation easement standpoint, so it's, is there interest, is there willingness?
Well, when we first funded this program, the first year, there was no request, and we're wondering, are we going to be collecting a tax and not use it? Then we started getting some interest in it, but we never got that dollar amount to say, okay, what is the potential amount of money that we have to pay for these conservation easements on these farms in Hunterbrook Township? So we did a exercise of going through all the farms in Hunterbrook Township. We got that information from the county. Then we used certain criteria saying the size of the farm, the quality of the soil, and so forth. So we looked at potentially 60 to 70% of the farms out there to be on a priority list, and it also matched up to the list that the county had provided, because the county was looking to ensure that a lot of these farms were under a conservation easement. The value, of course, because of the Brandywine Creek, you know, we want to make sure that, you know, the water gets protected and it's impacting so many of the municipalities beyond this. Sitting down and coming up with that number, what that potential number could be, at one point, the easements cost around, we were paying around $9,000, and that was the top dollar. So the program overall would have cost $50 million. So that would cost us as a township 50-50, $25 million. So up to right now, we have spent about $10 million. So the potential there, you know, for another $5-10 million, yes, we have to keep that available. But each year we keep sending out letters, and I said we is sent out on behalf of Hunterbrook Township by Brandywine Conservancy. So they go through the list of the farms that have not participated in this program, and several of the farmers said not interested. You know, and there has been some changes. If you look from one revision to the next, we went through 2 revisions, and that priority list has been expanded a few times. And that was not done by the Land Preservation Committee. That's what Brandywine Conservancy added additional farms to it. So that's why I said, we as a board, we have to keep on top of it. And that spreadsheet that you referred to, that was a result of when the township manager at the time, Mike Brown, handed it off to me and said, could you create that spreadsheet, expanded so we could use it? And that was to provide us with the contingencies of the deferred payments. Because we did get in trouble one time. We had deferred payments that were due, and we were trying to make a commitment on a farm that would have put us beyond the financials that we had. And the way the program works, we had 5 easement requests, and we submitted them all. If we couldn't come up and match that full amount, all those farms would have been pulled, and then other farms would have been replaced. We'd have to go through the program all over again.
So it's possible that we may not get any more in the program, any new properties.
That's true.
But I thought there are more
So
proposed
what I
farms.
would say is that the past 2 or 3 years, you can't use that as a baseline, just because of code.
Right.
This is the first year we've had the farmer's breakfast. I wouldn't write off the program until we see what the next few years kind of show for land preservation. The reality is farmers are just getting back to normal now. They might have other higher priorities that they're working on right now, but that doesn't mean that preserving their land isn't on their lists. Obviously, this is an ongoing program. Like John said, since there's no cutoff date, there's in a sense of urgency, I think, of farmers. Should we have had a 20-year cutoff date and be approaching 3 years, I think the onus would be on the farmers to either be all in or all out at that point, but just because we're not there, I think we need to wait a few more years to see it.
Well, I would say that we should cut off the tax entirely. Go ahead.
No, I guess what I was getting at was, so as we continue to collect the tax,
Yeah.
and we pay those that are already in the program, at some point, they will finish. And then, like, the TDRs that we're already paying out, right? I mean,
We typically pay them over a course of 5 years.
Yeah.
right, but eventually.
Do we have ongoing
I think we-
outlays from the fund at this point?
I think we have less than $40,000 this 2023 schedule.
Well, I think at this point, all those deferred payments, we either caught up or will.
Right, that's what I mean, so
Yeah,
there's not
so-
ongoing
yeah.
expenditure at the moment,
Yeah.
Now if you, any given farm, you said 9,000, you meant 900,000, I think.
So
Right,
9,000 acre, right?
9,000.
9,000 was
Right.
the
Yeah.
cost that we would spend to purchase well, that was the market value.
Per acre.
Per acre.
That's what, yes,
Right.
what the farmer gets.
So, if you take a 100-acre farm, it's almost $1 million.
Yes.
That's a big chunk, that, a handful of farms could eat away
Yeah.
at what you have in a hurry.
But the formula would be simple. We just take a look at the total number of acreage, and then we would look at the farms that would meet the criteria that we need to invest in. Because right from the start, we were not intending to purchase every acre of farms. That would not work. But then the remaining amount would be X amount of acres, and then we could put a dollar price on it and say that's a potential of $12 million. And then we have, at some point, the farmers have got to decide, are you in the program or not? Otherwise, right now we have a fund balance of $4.5 million. And I always caution when we got those updates what the fund balance is, because people would think, well, you would have all that, but there was money committed. So it's like a bank, your checkbook, you've already committed some money, and you got to make sure that you net that out. So what we're seeing right now, the money is growing, and it's a good idea to, instead of going with the property tax increases, but I always say that the purpose of that EIT that was sold to the community approved, was from that farmland, And just because it expanded the definition, you know, I think it would be wise to get the buy-in from the community.
So
Comments?
I have a question.
Yes.
So, if in fact down the road we did want to have a park, how would we fund it? I mean,
Yeah, that's
how would
good.
that actually happen? If we have the funds and technically, the funds are in place right now, and we decided not to do that, and then going forward, we decided to have a park, how's that actually gonna happen? Where are those funds gonna come from?
Well, when you're paying your taxes, you understood what you're being taxed for. In this case, you know, we're now saying we're going to use part of this open space.
So why
parks.
issue, we have a fund in place that allows for that, and if.
Yes, we have the
if-
authority to use it, yes.
Yes, if we decided not to do that, and then we down the road decided that we do want a park, which I believe everyone is in agreement that we do.
I'm
and-
sorry, Mark, go ahead.
In the comp plan, right, and we're supposed to have more parks and recreation. I didn't say what exact park,
Yep.
that's not what I said. So how would that be paid for?
Mhm. We've been asking that question for years, and recently it was discussed the potential of an increase in the property tax.
So basically, you could either A, increase property tax to potentially pay for a park that I didn't name the park, but a potential park, or B, use the money that we've already collected.
Well, if it's being diverted to another use, I mean, as a taxpayer, I would say, you know, why are you deferring that money to this other purpose?
But do you agree, or do you not agree? That, I mean, if we didn't use this money, which we have the ability to do legally,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It's a-
Or fund another park, if in fact our comp plan calls for another park in that direction of the township east, how would we fund it? I mean, you know, you just said raise taxes, if you raise taxes, you know, we either use the money we already have or raise taxes, no one ever wants to raise taxes.
That's correct, and that's one of the things I've been asking for several years, to reduce tax. Now, the question is simply say, do we pay for the parks through the dedicated EIT or through the property tax? And that's, my concern is, if we're going to go ahead and use the EIT, then we should get the input from the residents on that use.
So then the true question is, do you A, want your taxes raised to pay for a park, or B, use the funds that we've already had that we.
If the residents don't want
Taxes.
to, their income tax, and we want to go ahead with the parks, then we have to go back and say, this is how much it would cost in the property tax increase.
Well, do you have any, Lauren, just kind of from a financial standpoint, I know as part of your 5-year build-out, you were looking at certain investments and ability to kind of funnel certain money from general fund to kind of long-term, we're talking about road fund kind of concept. Is there anything that's relevant, kind of to Teresa's question about where you come from?
Sure. So we do have a healthy fund balance in the general fund, liquid fuels. We are funding our park and rec fund now, also from our general fund. It really just is going to determine what your open space active you want it to look like. Most municipalities, you know, if they have parks, they do fund the maintenance of, the purchase of, all of that through that dedicated fund. It's transparency. And again, we have the ability to do it. The EIT we get for land pres is a refilling fund. It just refills every year to the tune of about $950,000. You know, there's other ways you can obviously fund park and rec. It's just going to look at, you know, when we build out a budget, we look at our revenue first, and then we match what we can expend on that. So if we have good years with EIT and taxable income, then, you know, we can fund these processes and the parks and the capital improvements that we'd like to do. Again, we can also just live off of the stays with land press, and I think this year alone, we're looking at getting about $200,000 in interest. So even if the board was just interested in taking the interest earned and not actually the tax dollars coming in from the earned income, that would still meet that requirement of making a maintenance fund, not using actual taxpayer dollars, but the interest earned off to fund the rec. And that might be a good first step.
We also look at the operation reserve fund, that's $350,000, and interest that is generated from that. When that interest earned on that rainy day fund would go into the general fund, we needed to put additional money into EMS. So that year, we took the money, the interest generated, and gave that $6,000 to EMS.
Absolutely. We have restricted and unrestricted funds.
Yes.
Our land res is a restricted fund, our liquid fuels are restricted funds. Some of the recreation fund is unrestricted and restricted, depending where that money came from. Our operating reserve is not a restricted fund, but it's there to keep the township municipality afloat for 3 months should something critical happen. 2023 and onwards, I think we have a healthy fund balance, and that's not a required fund, but it just makes good sense to keep it there. We can pull interest from other funds that are restricted, but I believe my conversation over this last year is that we're gonna reach a critical juncture with first responders, ambulance and fire companies, and we are not there yet. The board elected to not raise property tax to fund EMS and fire higher than we have in previous years. Again, it's gonna come sooner than later when we might be owning a fire company and an ambulance hall. So, I would say, can we pull interest from other funds and put it towards rec? Absolutely. My ask was that we take the funds, interest earned from Pliget in investment in EMS and fire, and potentially some park, but, I think the more prudent portion this year is if you're not comfortable taking actual taxpayer dollars out of liquid fuels, at least, or out of land preservation, at least look at utilizing the interest earned from those funds.
And there needs to be some target amount that we need for, park and rec. Is it gonna be 5,000, 50,000, or, we have to have some idea of what that need would be?
So, John, that's going to go into our next topic, the capital improvement plan. This capital improvement plan, we're not going to get ahead of ourselves, but, the 5-year build-out of our budget is just a strategic budget. That's showing the board where we anticipate being in 5 years.
Right.
The second part of that, which will actually make this work a lot better, is the capital improvement plan. When we have to do capital improvements within our park, within our facilities, with EMS, that's going to really show us long-term, as far as 30 years, where we're going to need to start saving and start having funds. So, but that's a discussion as well. The 5-year budget did show $300,000 a year going into the park, some from capital, some from general fund, and some from the land preservation fund, so we could have a healthy park and rec.
And that 5-year build-out is what I asked for in December of 2021. And it would have helped if we had implemented that a few years earlier. And it certainly would have helped if we had it in place back in the day, so we didn't have to borrow money on the land preservation.
Absolutely, unfortunately, I can't.
Yeah,
what
yeah,
happened
after-
prior to my
prior-
tenure, but
Yes.
again, going forward, I'm trying to set
Yeah.
the township to really be able to look 30 years down the road and anticipate what we can be, but that is going to be making hard decisions. What we have done in the past might not work for what we have to do in the future, so this is obviously just a discussion to see if there's interest in looking down this road, because if not, all the board has really great input. These are taxpayer dollars set aside for a certain activity, and the laws have changed. Maybe there's some room for negotiation, just look at interest. And again, as Beth had said, clearly, if we have a windfall of requests to conserve 10 farms next year, that we have the funds to take care of it. If we have funds earmarked for rec and park, obviously I would say TDRs are more important, that we could pull funds from that restricted rec and park and put it back into land preservation.
We haven't had much success on the TDRs. Occasionally, we've sold some of them, but that's another option that some of the farmers have not pursued.
So again, this is just starting, the 5-year build out does show funds going into Records Park. And again, that's just looking down the road that we.
From the general fund.
From the general fund and from land pres.
Yeah.
Again, if the board elects to not do anything with the maintenance fund, we are still putting money from our general funds, some of our overtures as an expense into it to help fund it partially.
I mean, this was a good conversation. We need maintenance fund for parks. I mean, when we looked at Hummel Park, there wasn't anything there. But my question is, what options do we have? And it seems like we have a few options to fund. And as far as the last question on this, if we were to put that question out to the public as a referendum, what would that take?
In terms of
Continue to-
process,
Yeah.
it's been a while since I did one. I mean, there's a certain amount of advance notice that you have to get it placed on the ballot.
Right.
But, I mean, the law really provides the form of the question pretty explicitly if you're looking to,
Well, usually it takes at least 6 months to get notified voter services, and then, they get those issues. At least that's a conversation I had voter service a few years ago.
I don't think you need 6 months for a referendum.
Well, this is going on the November ballot, that's usually in that time frame.
I mean, I can get that answer for you. I actually just had to look at it for someone else. It's
Can we-
in and right back out.
Sure. All right, so in terms of the board, as far as on that maintenance fund discussion, any further discussion, decision, of what?
I personally hope that the interest from the actual fund rather than the actual tax dollars is maybe a good step forward and a nice solution for the time being.
It's too healthy, but those two funds are healthy, especially with the money that's being invested right now.
So it's kind of a win-win, right? Because
Yeah.
we're able to make money with that money, not taking those tax dollars that people voted to preserve farmland and use it for parks. But we still have that money available to us.
And we do have an update on the land preservation program coming up soon. So that's one of the things that we have to work on the financials and to demonstrate, like, what's the potential, what we have outstanding. If we do have every potential farm come forward requesting the conservation easement, is that like 10 million, is that 15 million? Also, at what point do we continue? I mean, we keep taxing for another 20 years, and the fund keeps building, the farmers are not.
Well, obviously, if we're not preserving land, we shouldn't charge people with tax.
Yeah.
That's obvious.
Yeah. So, all right, I guess the guidance on
I have some guidance, let me see what I can work with and get some information back to the board. Again, this is not something that we're looking at putting on the agenda item, April and May. This is just really starting the conversation and seeing the direction of the board.
Yeah, if you guys have any other questions, I'm available
Okay.
to walk through.
All right. I think we can move to item 3, capital improvement plan. So Warren?
Yeah, so we already hit on it. Part of our strategic plan shows us our outlook for the next 5 years, where we want to put our funds, what we're looking at doing. But our capital projects are going to be looking out further. So one of the things that we're looking at is we have a 30-year depreciation schedule that we currently use for all capital items within the township. So that's trucks, buildings, HVAC systems, generators and the such. But the goal, and again, Paul's going to be working with the board and I as well over the next handful of months, is kind of what we talked about over the last year. Is there anything that the board has a vision of seeing implemented? Capital projects, whether that's, a police department building, replacing roofs, maybe trying to find a campus that can fit maybe the expansion of a township we believe we could have more facilities, or if the board is fine with, the direction that the administration is going mostly seeing public works administration building, having a fleet of vehicles that provide services. So again, it's just an initial talk that I don't need feedback, anybody doesn't have it this evening, but again, looking back through the comprehensive plan, the park and rec comp plan, are there aspects that maybe individual board members think we should try to be pushing more towards, whether that's, as Tracy noted, that we do have a deficiency in parks, so should the municipality be looking at purchasing open space in the next handful of years to make a dedicated park trail system, or any of those things, because again, good planning will allow us to have those funds set aside, we'll find a repayment plan that can make it palatable for the township to start acquiring land or providing other services to the community, be it a fire company or an ambulance, or changing the direction of the services that the township wishes to offer to the community.
One thing on that, on the comp plan, we have a set of goals. The plan document is static, so if I go to the website and I see a particular goal, I have no way of knowing if it has been pursued or completed. And going forward with our website, that might be something we might want to consider and say, this particular goal is at 50% completed at this point. And it would show the community some of the things that has been accomplished. That would be something I'd suggest.
Here was the current comp plan. You're talking about just the regular comprehensive plan, not the parks,
Okay. The comp plan has, yeah, yeah.
2018.
And it's a big document, and when the copy gets loaded as a PDF, so unless you go in there and update the particular page, which we have been doing, there's no way of knowing what progress has been accomplished.
Well, I mean, you can't update the page, but some kind of summary report
Yeah,
of just sort of
Well, I think-
loosely the goals and
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah, the
status.
idea of when we talk about things, we're saying, the reason that we're asking for parks in the eastern end of the township is because that's what it says in the comp plan.
that we've been looking at that for years. Unfortunately, a lot of the land over there is private land.
There's a lot of big tracks, and there's not a lot of things that come up for sale.
All right. And we did have an opportunity one time that you looked at, in the middle of the woods, there was a
Yeah.
driveway, and,
On Eastdale Road,
yeah,
but the township didn't have to turn around funds that fast because it was from private.
yeah,
sale.
and the problem too is it was so isolated, it was not exactly an ideal location to put the park. Yeah.
It was on the grain line.
Well, yeah, we want to make sure that we have parks close to some of the homes. Any questions on capital improvement plan? Anything else?
I just asked that the board could just review the comp plan,
Yeah.
the park and rec comp plan, if there's something that piques their interest, reach out to me and, have a discussion. And see maybe how we can, start putting it into our capital improvement plan. And again, to your point, John, that capital improvement plan is kind of putting the comp plan in the park and rec plan, and anything else we want actually into action. Part of the capital improvement plan does have timelines and dates for completions and follow-ups, and so it's not a plan like the comprehensive plans we can do updates materially and show how far we've come along. And it's gonna run associated with those other two plans.
That would be helpful when you get around to, every 10 years you're supposed to update the comprehensive plan.
Yes.
To sort of see where you come, at that update, there may be a change in vision, but from where you are, you see, unfortunately, comprehensive plans are a endeavor, you spend money, you have consultants, you spend lots of time talking about it, especially at the planning commission level, it gets adopted, and then it goes on a shelf.
Yeah.
More often than not, and, there was thought put into them, so it wouldn't hurt to. I pulled up the park one from 2020, which doesn't feel that long ago. It was actually kind of insightful to just kind of look back, there was resident surveys done of what types of facilities they wanted, that had changed since that time, but, it's kind of, with some of the conversations we've been having, it was interesting to just kind of revisit.
The first
The vision
survey,
that had been set.
the first survey we did for the Parks and Rec, we only got about 50 people responding to it. And, but there is, the opportunity where, to do surveys with the public. We could link it to our website. I just did a survey at my company where as soon as I load the information, it generates all these graphs and shows me everything, who responded, percentages. It's all done automatically, where years ago we used to do that in an Excel spreadsheet. So, again, I think that website upgrade will be helpful to get some feedback from the residents. All right, do we have any other business?
I just made one comment.
Go ahead.
Kudos to the road department Monday night
Yeah.
with the slippery roads. I was out driving Monday night, and when the township roads were wonderful,
Yeah.
state roads were horrible.
Yeah.
Like, there was not one piece of salt on
Yeah.
so shout out to them.
Have you ever been on the 10? When we have snow, the trucks come through and then the wind blows and it's covered. It's very dangerous to go down that road. All right, as far as the other business, we did have an opportunity, Ann Hutchinson of Land Trust had asked if we wanted to speak to her. She was looking at our ordinances and made some suggestions. She said that she would be willing to sit down with us without any charge, go through some of the environmental ordinances. So overall, we have some good work done in there. So is that something that the board would like to reach out to Ann at this juncture?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. I'll see when she's available. Right. And then do we have any feedback on the EAC ordinance? Did you have a chance to take a
So
look at it?
I got everyone's feedback and sent you an email last week that had all. the
Okay.
feedback from the board.
I seem to have missed a couple of emails. There was another one that you had sent, and I think what's happened is, I'm getting it during work time, and then I get to go back later on and take a look.
So I did send it to you with all the feedback, and my ask would be that you review that and then just
I didn't get it. All right, I'll get that.
respond back to me, and I can kind of help facilitate review that along.
Good. All right, at this point, let's go to open forum, so let's turn to the side of the room. Any questions, comments that you would like to raise tonight? I see a gentleman over here. Could you give your name and your street, please?
Yes, my name is Bob Williams. I live at 18th Court in Blackfoot Development. In your 5-year plan, I didn't hear anything about police or fire capital expenditure. That's my first question. The second question is the Foxbrook Park and Foxbrook Development that you're under consideration, and the Norton project, they're within a half a mile of each other. Is there a reason why we have parks a half mile apart? Thank you.
Do we have a response to that?
I think we did talk a little bit about EMS funding, that we need to be, Warren mentioned it, that we need to be aware of the fact that the future of emergency management services is going to raise for our township, and we're cognizant of that, and we're trying to plan for that. We did talk about that.
We are giving the ambulance company $120,000 of money this year, and we got $100,000 in funding through Telhi for the fire companies to do that. So we are actually making progress with our first responders.
First, question. Question was police and fire.
Yep.
So address that, please.
Have a response? Okay. Well, the only thing that they have at the moment, a conversation with Honeybrook Borough. We did have a conversation with West Brandywine, but that's several years ago. There was no discussion in our budget for 2023 to consider that. So in the subsequent conversation I had with the borough council people, they were saying, does the township want to take a look at it again? And And that's about as far as we've gone with that, with the law enforcement. Yeah. We do have a reminder up there on the vision statement, I believe, or actually on the mission statement, it says police protection, and that's something we do provide with the state police currently. Okay, just want to say okay, Bob, did we answer your questions?
It's in the works for one.
Yeah. Well, we did have a task force a few years ago, but if that's the direction we need to do, we could go in that direction. And we had a conversation with West Brandywine, Honeybrook Borough, and Honeybrook Township, but that was not completed. So,
Well, there are numerous break-ins happening
yeah.
that have been reported in the last 4 weeks.
And when we did have that task force, that was one of the things that came out of the, what we learned about it, that people get to a point where they don't report things because there's no police department to call, or the response from the state police overall has been good, but there's times when they just don't have the manpower to respond to some things like vandalism. And those things, people just report to their auto insurance, and that's not tallied into our reports, because we do get a monthly report from the state police on the calls that they make. And I believe the lowest last year was 90 calls in December, and I think the average is somewhere like 120 a month that they respond. But some of them are just not necessarily
I
important
wouldn't
calls.
say the response. They do 74 school checks.
Yeah.
That's just statistically not possible.
Yeah.
Now, the more people you bring into a community, the more chances you have of a serious crime. That's proven fact.
Yeah. Well, it's up to the board if we want to step forward on that. We can talk further on that.
What about the parks being half mile apart?
I'm sorry?
What about the proposed parks that are going to be less than a half a mile apart?
Oh, yes, yeah. I'm surprised that we did come up with this second park where, on Coupland Road. And all these years it was sitting there, and that information never got funneled back to the current board. We do need parks, and we've been looking for land for years. All of a sudden, we have two within a short distance, and it's not something I expected to encounter. Any questions? Yeah.
Well, I think, they're both in the very early stages. There's nothing that's written in stone. The operative word is proposed. So, we've talked about the comp plan and how the township is deficient in parks and open space for recreation. So, in order for us to figure out what we want to do, we need to look at different things and figure out what's the best for the township.
Yes, but doesn't D.R. Horton propose to be 30 acres plus parkland?
36.
36?
Yeah.
Well, again, it's
That's
proposed,
where
like,
people reside.
Yeah.
I mean, if I may, developments die all the time. You get, much further than this development is, and then they never get built. So,
I'm just projecting.
yep, I understand your point. I just, there's been a sense that this project is a foregone conclusion with D.R. Horton. I feel that in the community, but they're not always. So, we can't just do nothing and assume that someone else is going to build us a park, and that's going to solve all the problems. And so I think the board's going to be looking to consider what options exist.
What is the acreage per population for parks in the state of Pennsylvania?
I don't think anyone sitting up here tonight is going to be able to answer that for you.
That information was provided by Brandywine Conservancy, and we were looking at comp plan. I'm sure they reference where the material come from. They're pretty good in their graphs and stuff, who generated and where the data came from. So,
That is on the township website,
yeah.
the parks, the
that the Brandywine Conservancy said they're looking at a 25 square mile municipality with X amount of residents. You know, this is the potential amount of basketball courts, soccer fields, and so forth. And yes, we were quite deficient in that. At one point, the Parks and Rec, we were discussing about an agreement with some of the other municipalities, like St. Field over by Penwood. So they have a soccer field, and we have a baseball field. Why don't we come up with an agreement and say, can we use your soccer field? You can use our baseball field. You know, that'd be that trade-off. I had a conversation with West Brandywine, and I said, if there was an opportunity for them to build a park by Honeybrook Township, and that we could share that park, because they have a police department, we don't, and that's one of the things that I was cautious about. That grew into beyond a park, into that whole trail, and before we know it, that was $1 million project. A trail is essentially going nowhere.
Wouldn't it be advantageous to spread the parks out over the whole township?
Yes, that would be.
One area?
Yeah. But, and Tracy, you've been on board long enough to remember all the times that we have gone down that avenue. And it's just a matter of finding available land. Because even though there's 25 square miles here, we had just, targeted especially the southeast area, saying we definitely need to put something there. And there was nothing other than the race course down there. And talking to some of the residents in Gregory Court, Brandywine Terrace, they would say to me, John, I mean, we've been hearing this for years, that we need parks, but nothing's been happening. And it's because we just couldn't get the land to do it. All right. But thanks for bringing that up. It's, anyone else on this side of the room, any questions, comments?
Not this time.
Okay, thank you. On this side of the room?
Valerie Schultz, 165 Caitlin Court.
Yes.
You and I had briefly spoken a few days ago about the potential for a walkthrough of Brook HOA property, and that would be on the agenda for next week. Is there a reason why that was not placed on the agenda?
Can I chime in? I had a phone call today from the attorney for the HOA, and his preference really was that kind of the communications between the township and the HOA kind of stay between council, to the extent that the board authorized the solicitor to have those conversations. We had reached out requesting sort of a formal approval from the HOA because it's their land. The township can't just go walk the property without permission. I think at this juncture, there's really nothing to be on the township agenda about that until there's permission granted by the HOA to consider that.
Well, I think the question was whether that was something that they would even consider, that the board would actually consider.
My concern was to say, to go to the property, take a look, because right now we're looking at pictures. But then I know from my experience that land has often been used for graduation parties and things like that. And the land has been sitting there for years, and whether or not you and I just discussed that there was a potential easement on those properties. As I said, I know from the neighbors living there. I've been over there to their properties. Sometimes that stretch of land was used for parking and things like that. The township has never said you're trespassing.
The township doesn't own the land. Right, yes.
You're okay to do it. And we told the lawyer what we want. So the lawyer
Okay.
knows. We
Okay.
want the law. We told
Okay.
him today.
Okay, well,
All right, so-
I hadn't heard from him for several weeks. I did call him the day after the meeting, the beginning of February.
I understand. If the lawyer's not telling us not to do it, we've asked him to do it, he said, okay.
Fair enough. And we'll continue that process. I think on the township's end, I think it makes sense to have someone from our side that has some type of technical eye. I think the township engineer would be part of any type of walkthrough. Just, and we're not going to be able to vet all of the, possibilities or potential problems in one visit. But at least getting some feet on the ground and start identifying, if there's clear possibilities or problems that are worth exploring to the positive or negative, because what we authorized last month is essentially, you know, a meeting, but I think the consensus was also that having a meeting until the township has any sense, you know, and the conversation between the council really was, having a site meeting probably makes sense before we sit down and have a discussion with each other, because the township has no idea at this point what we would want to do, if we think we can do anything, until we get some more information. So the site, sometimes site visit is a first step to just start continuing to gather information and see if this is viable.
We've been going back and forth. One of the things that I need some clarification on, and that has to do with the trail from the Chestnut Bridge. It's gone back and forth so many times. I'm not sure where it stands at this point, because are we back to the original location for the trail?
The trail's finished.
So my understanding was, the Board of Supervisors had approved the final plan. Residents from Foxborough came after that finalization had been provided, and had some concerns about the trail. Previous administrator worked with the Brandywine Conservancy, who did a study, which they presented to the board last year, and that the developer said they were willing to change the trail should it not cost any funds. Brandywine Conservancy said it was gonna go through some wetlands, so some DEP permits were gonna be required, and some trail systems would have to be wetlands engineered, which would cost additional funds. So the township provided